Microsoft's introduction into the 6th generation console race with the original Xbox was monumental. Even if the PlayStation 2 simply could not be beat in terms of sales, very often do people look at the Xbox as a console with not too many games or much interest because it went almost neck and neck with the GameCube and simply piggybacked off of the Dreamcast failures. What many of those same people fail to understand is how Microsoft simply needed an entry point that showed developers and gamers what they are capable of. As such, Microsoft did not hesitate to unleash their most explosive console of all time. This system shattered expectations all throughout, especially when nobody else was ready to jump into the next generation of gaming. In November of 2005, Microsoft gave us the Xbox 360, a powerful, feature-rich, and incredible system. This is its tale, one of many successes. The original Xbox launched in November of 2001, which was the second to last console to launch during that generation, coming out right before the GameCube. And just 4 years later, almost to the day, Microsoft pulled a Sega and launched the Xbox 360 way ahead of anyone else. The world was deeply anticipating the launch of the PlayStation 3 and the Nintendo Wii, but those wouldn't be ready for another entire year. As Microsoft built up so much goodwill during the original Xbox's run and Sony wasn't quite ready, Microsoft ended up having an entire year to convince PlayStation 2 gamers who were considering trying something new to finally switch. The Xbox 360 was touted to be much more powerful than the original, as we now enter the 7th generation of gaming, while being significantly smaller and even more aesthetically interesting than the original model. But the twist is that now we have two launch models, the Xbox 360 Core and the Xbox 360 Pro, for lack of better words. Both of these offered experiences that were catered to slightly different audiences, but they are worth noting. For the most part, they were identical. On the front, you'll find an IR sensor for use for a remote control, 2 memory units for Xbox games, a sync button, a flap for 2 USB-A ports, an eject button, and the DVD drive itself. Microsoft decided to stick with DVDs this time around, considering that DVDs are the best formats for physical content available at this time. On the left side, you will find a slot for your hard drive, which is now easily attachable and detachable without much fuss. This is great for making swapping between storage solutions so much easier, or even upgrading. And then on the back, you would get an Ethernet port, a USB-A port, an AV out port for composite and component connections, as well as the power connector. These are going to be true for both launch models of the Xbox 360, but there are some differences that sets them apart. The core edition of the Xbox 360 had a matte white finish for the DVD tray and no hard drive included. In the box, you only got a wired controller that connected over USB and a composite cable. The Pro version came with a chrome DVD tray, a 20GB hard drive pre-attached, a wireless controller, with some component cables, a headset for online communications, and an Ethernet cable. Neither system came with Wi-Fi built in, with the expectation that you would need to use a Wi-Fi adapter if you needed Wi-Fi. Back in 2005, this wasn't a problem because a wireless internet connection was not super widespread, and Ethernet was the most commonly used form for an internet connection. I just mentioned a moment ago, the Xbox 360 only plays DVDs, but at this stage of the game, we now get dual-layered DVDs, which could only hold up to 8.5GB of storage, which is not a massive improvement compared to last generation, and a lot of games definitely made use of that entire storage space, and some even needed multiple discs just to be able to carry all of that content that it was meant to. At this time, hard drive space was definitely at a premium, as 20GB was the most that could be offered on the most expensive model. This wasn't a ton of storage back in 2005, but it was decent and certainly a lot better than nothing at all. Blu-rays came out in 2006, and these discs could hold 25GB of storage or even 50GB on a dual-layered disc, and Microsoft's answer was to use HD DVDs, which could hold up to 15GB or 30GB on a dual-layered disc. This never made it into the gaming part of the 360 because then it would mean that everyone would eventually have to purchase their $200 HD DVD reader in order to play their games, so this remains as an optional accessory for content consumption. consumption, like movies and shows exclusively. Then we finally got one of the best controllers of all time. This was the Xbox 360 controller. In terms of its design, it's much closer to a Type S controller from the original Xbox and carries hardly any DNA whatsoever from the Duke controller that Microsoft desperately wanted to forget. This controller is much smaller than the S-Type controller, but it has what I would consider an ideal size and grip. The ergonomics were simply at their best with the 360 compared to everyone else for the rest of this generation. They went for a controller design that was perfect for kids, perfect for adults, or anyone of different hand sizes. The analog sticks are still off-axis, which is preferred by many gamers, and the D-pad is much closer to what they offered with the Type S controller. However, it's more manageable and it allows for smooth rolling functionality as well as just being a very responsive D-pad. The ABXY buttons make a fine return as they feel as solid as ever to press. The back and start buttons were moved to the middle of the controller, right next to the Xbox logo, which is now pressable and can be used to access different settings on your 360. This is a brand new feature to any home console, as being able to switch between your home settings and other important aspects will become very important this generation without the need for a reset whatsoever. The Xbox 360 now has a full set of shoulder buttons, including the LB and RB buttons, which are clickier, almost like mouse clicks, but heavier, and the trigger buttons RT and LT with levels of resistance when pressed. This was a nearly perfect design for a controller as everything was perfectly smooth to reach for. And then you have the sync button for syncing this controller to your Xbox, a port for using this as a wired controller if you'd like, and of course, we also have a battery pack for AA batteries. By default, these batteries are obviously not rechargeable, but you do get 20 hours of playtime compared to the roughly 8 or less hours that I would find myself dealing with on the PlayStation 3 side of things. This means less uninterrupted sessions, but it does mean having to spend a lot of money on constantly buying AA batteries. This is not my preferred trade-off. One awesome feature from the controller is how you get 4 lights around the Xbox button to display which player number you are. Speaking of that Xbox button, this is the button that you can press to turn on your Xbox remotely and be greeted by this incredible welcome splash screen. Once inside, gamers were met by the Blades interface, which lets you navigate to the avatar creator, music, media, Xbox Live content, system settings, launching a game, and so much more. Of course, you can press this button at any time to access these settings and more. This interface will allow for a lot of flexibility in what you can do, and it is undeniable how iconic this was. At this time, the Xbox 360 was not always an HD console, as they decided to go with an analog video connection in order to keep the costs down, even if HDMI was a thing. So if you stuck with composite cables, then you would be playing your games at 480i, which is a notable downgrade if you're playing on a flat screen or larger TV overall compared to the component connection that allows for resolutions of up to 1080i. Needless to say, to make the most of the visuals on this system, component cables would be a must, but many people still settled for composite for years to come. The Xbox 360 was absolutely amazing within the context of 2005. Not to mention that many gamers appreciated the launch price of both models. The core model launched at $299, a price that seemed so good at the time. Then the Pro model, as we were calling it, at $399, with those costs going mostly towards the wireless controller, better cables, accessories, but most importantly, that hard drive. Not to mention that the core model was upgradable from the start, so you could add a hard drive whenever you wanted. The 360 is even backwards compatible with original Xbox games, but you need a hard drive to play these. The Xbox 360 looked like it was set up for victory, even if Sony nor Nintendo could answer for an entire year. Now, getting a new hardware reveal is always a sight to behold, and the Xbox 360 offered a lot of greatness in terms of what it could do. The biggest selling point on any piece of gaming hardware is whether or not it will have great games, especially compared to everyone else. The games that Microsoft delivered on within their first year without any competition were great, but the games that came even after the PlayStation 3 and the Wii launched in the following year were still so much better. These are the games that made the Xbox 360 so special. The original Xbox was well known for being a platform that was easier to port games to from a PC standpoint due to it already being based around a Pentium 3 CPU, which was commonly used on desktops. This was an advantage that the Xbox held because it did allow for some unique experiences that were only possible on it. For the Xbox 360, Microsoft decided to move forward with a computer-based platform that was also generally considered easier to develop and program for compared to the competition in many regards. This was due to Microsoft implementing a PowerPC CPU known as Xenon instead of going with a Pentium or Celeron-esque processor. This was their own CPU developed in collaboration with IBM specifically for the 360, and the purpose of it was to ensure that they could control the pricing and lower costs in the future if desired. This was a very powerful chip, and even Sony ended up going with a PowerPC CPU for their PlayStation 3, the Cell processor. For this generation, Microsoft decided to go with 512 megabytes of RAM, which is 8 times as much RAM as the original model came with. Very important for what they wanted to achieve with the 360 specifically this time around. At launch, we received quite a few games that had a decent amount of excitement, such as Call of Duty 2, Perfect Dark Zero, Embed 3, among others. These games were not the ones to sell the Xbox 360 to gamers in the long run, as most launch titles don't always do a great job at showing what the next generation will look like, even if these games still look very good at the time. The real bangers came over the course of this generation, releasing several amazing games every single year that most people would consider must-plays. To start with, Microsoft had many exclusives under its belt that certainly got a lot of attention. Halo 3 was a massive release that piggybacked off of the incredible experiences that were Halo, Combat Evolved, and Halo 2 on the original Xbox, bringing the first-person shooter back to the big screen, and it really did feel like that next-gen game that everyone was waiting for, with improved shadows, reflections, mechanics, all of which contribute to a more realistic art direction for the series. Forza made its return on the 360 with Forza Motorsport 2, bringing much nicer visuals and getting the attention of gamers who love racing games in general. This series is always spoken of very highly whenever racing games are brought up. Then the massive title, Gears of War, did wonders in terms of taking advantage of the power of the Xbox 360 with beautiful textures, environments, a gripping story, and engaging gameplay that hadn't been done this well in any third-person shooter before the introduction of this series. But of course, the 360 had so many amazing gems on the third-party and first-party side of things, including GTA 4, which is still the highest reviewed game on Metacritic for the 360 to this day. The Mass Effect games, including 1, 2, and 3, Portal 2, Red Dead Redemption, Call of Duty Black Ops, Batman Arkham City, the BioShock games, Gears of War 2 was also highly beloved, Dead Space 2, Bayonetta was a much better performer on the 360 than it was on the PlayStation 3, Assassin's Creed 1, 2, 3, and the in-between titles were also incredible on the system, Far Cry 3, the Borderlands games, Fable 2, Left 4 Dead, obviously Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion and Skyrim are a huge part of that conversation when it comes to the best games among so many others. The 360 was also home to games like Dark Souls 1 and 2, which were both incredible, Naruto The Broken Bond, with the Storm series of games making it onto this platform, including 2 Generations 3 and Revolution, the Raging Blast games on the Dragon Ball side of things, Guitar Hero and Rock Band with their respective instruments, Dishonored, Halo Reach, and Halo 4 also made it onto the system later on as incredible exclusives, and the list only goes on for incredible and unique experiences, if not just better and more consistent experiences compared to what the PlayStation 3 had for quite some time while developers were still getting the hang of the Cell processor. Not to mention that when a game was released on both the 360 and the PlayStation 3, the 360 version of that game was almost always the best way to play it due to the complicated nature of the Cell processor that was difficult to work with and to learn. Many games like Skyrim and Bayonetta were considerably better and more consistent experiences on the 360. Many of these games also saw great success due to Microsoft's Xbox Live service that was still paid, but everyone felt like they got their money's worth every time considering how stable Microsoft servers always were, at least once Microsoft addressed the many issues with the service that came around its launch year. Microsoft had 2 million active subscribers during the original Xbox era, and they simply did not anticipate how much online traffic there would be with the 360. So there were many interruptions to the service around the first few months because that 2 million number grew to about 7 million around Christmas time of 2005. However, this service was split into 2, a free tier known as Xbox Live Silver and a paid tier known as Xbox Live Gold. The free version allowed you to purchase games from the Xbox Store, DLC, and more, while also being able to create an Xbox profile, make friends, send messages, and keep track of achievements. The Gold membership allowed you to actually play online multiplayer games with others, as well as offering a free arcade game every month, game discounts, and more. In terms of the gaming experience, the Xbox 360 addressed so many aspects of what we would consider important back in the mid to late 2000s, and honestly still expect to see today. But one thing we were not used to was the consistent hardware failures that we would see this generation. And with the new 360 hardware, death quickly came knocking. The Xbox 360 was at the forefront of hardware failure, all due to Microsoft's own negligence. Too many of us lost our beloved 360s during the most unprecedented of times, never to be seen again. This is the story of the dreaded Red Ring of Death and how it killed too many systems. The Red Ring of Death was a phenomenon that plagued so many 360 systems, and it was dubbed this way because we would always witness our 360's green lights suddenly turn red, giving us anywhere between 1 and 4 lights to indicate what the issue is. The single light meant that there was a hardware failure inside, indicating that one component stopped working with a 2-digit error code displayed for you to admire. This at least gave you some ideas as to what could be wrong, but it's nothing that you could fix at home. The 2 lights indicated that the system simply overheated and needs some time to cool down before you can begin using it again. The 4 lights indicated that the system isn't detecting your AV cables, which could easily be fixed by securing the AV cable or purchasing a new one. But the worst one was the 3 red lights, indicating that your system had no chance of making it. This indicates that there was a general hardware failure where 1 or more components stopped working, with no error code whatsoever. When you saw this, you knew that it was over. Most of these hardware failures occurred due to multiple factors. The PowerPC Xenon CPU was a hot one, and it was confined within a very packed system. The 360 had so many components packed into it that there wasn't even room for the power supply. So that CPU was just one cause for concern when everything else is subject to more heat than it is supposed to handle. This was an issue that Microsoft tried really hard to sweep under the rug and pretended as if these issues were showing up on a reasonable amount of systems. But they knew that this was a huge issue because millions of 360s were affected by the Red Ring of Death. Microsoft was eventually forced to extend the warranty of their systems from 3 months to 1 year and eventually to even 3 years because this was happening at such a ridiculous rate. As a result of this widespread problem, many users resorted to home remedies for their systems, and the list goes on for the many things that people tried. People tried baking their systems in the oven, making modifications to the insides to allow for better airflow, using warm, moist towels, among others. And this was mostly done because Microsoft hadn't done much to fix this issue on their end for quite a while, and the cost of repairing one of these systems when the problem could occur due to a myriad of issues was expensive. This caused Microsoft to redesign the innards of the 360 with models that came later in 2007, such as the Xbox 360 Elite model that came with a lot more room to breathe inside, and discontinuing the core version of the 360, while now featuring an arcade edition of it for those on a budget. Prices even dropped to $279 for the arcade edition, and eventually even dropped as low as $199. The Elite models launched at $479, but those prices dropped significantly as well over the course of its run. The 360 did lose a lot of momentum when the Red Ring of Death was at its peak, and it would have destroyed Xbox as a brand if it hadn't been for Microsoft's ability to eat the cost of repairing or replacing 360 units. And if the PlayStation 3 hadn't had hardware failures of its own, along with the launch of this system being universally recognized as being botched, the 360's failure rates were eventually improved drastically with the new models. But those who had the original Xbox 360 systems, whether it were the core or the Pro versions, eventually saw this happen to them. At the core of it all, Microsoft needed to redesign the 360 to ensure this did not happen again, as too much money and so much goodwill had been sacrificed from this issue. Now, midway through the 7th generation of gaming, Sony was already very serious about fixing many of the hardware issues encountered from their fat model PS3s with the PlayStation 3 Slim. Microsoft had a lot of work to do, as they needed a redesign that would not succumb to the same problems. Microsoft had massive plans for the 360 moving forward, and in 2010 we received the ultimate redesign, the Xbox 360S or Slim, and even some amazing goodies to address the Wii specifically as a competitor that could no longer be ignored: the Kinect. The Xbox 360S was the answer that everybody was hoping for at this point. It is a much smaller version of the original models while offering everything that they do, but with the added security that you will not experience a Red Ring of Death whatsoever. You are now safe in Microsoft's hands. The 360S now comes in black, and just as before, you can either lay it down on its side or leave it standing. On the front, you will find an eject and power buttons, which are now touch sensitive. These buttons get a lot of hate because they were so easy to trigger by accident, and I agree with you there, but it feels so nice to use, probably just the nostalgia speaking, but it feels right. Then you will also notice the DVD drive, a reset sync button, which will be right next to two USB-A ports. On the top left side, which is the side that points upwards when it's standing, you get an easily accessible hard drive bay. This one is much better than the originals because it lets you use any 2.5-inch drive very easily without an enclosure whatsoever. This does not require any tools at all, and it's so easy to access. Then on the back, you will get a new power connector that works with a much smaller power supply, optical audio port, AV out for composite and components, as well as the addition of HDMI, which means that you can finally use a digital signal to play your games in HD now that HDMI compliant TVs are so much more popular and affordable. You even get a specialized USB port and Ethernet right underneath, even if the slim model now has Wi-Fi built in, which is incredible. Then you will notice 3 USB-A ports for a total of 5 on this system. This means that the S model has been modernized completely for the latter half of the 360's life cycle, and it came in beautifully. The S model really had it all, and it didn't need those pesky memory unit slots anyway, because the base model came with 4 GB of storage built in, and the next model had 256 GB of storage through a hard drive. It was priced much more nicely, even as we got this entire package for $199 on the 4 GB model and $299 on the 250 GB model. The prices were great, but buying a hard drive to use with your system was a nightmare. They were extremely expensive at $129 for 250 GB of storage additionally, which was out of the reach of many people. So many customers either grabbed a different SATA drive from a PC and used it with their Xbox, or simply stuck with 4 GB for save data, as most people still preferred purchasing games physically anyway. A few months after the release of the S model, we also got a much more modern iteration of the Xbox dashboard, the Metro dashboard, which is the best looking one of the bunch, and it really helps to communicate with the buyer that they aren't just a gaming system, but they've got a streaming box for apps like Netflix, YouTube, and more, because we finally entered that era of media consumption. And in 2010, Microsoft launched another massive project on the pipeline of everything that was meant to become an aspect of Xbox, the Kinect. By 2010, the Wii was the highest selling console, which led not only Microsoft, but even Sony to believe that they really needed to invest in motion controls for their systems. Motion controls did not really feel like a gimmick to everyone, because it was part of what made the Wii so special. But the reality is that it definitely was, as this was a notion that was phased out over the years. However, Microsoft and Sony believed that this was something that they should do so that everyone would flock over to their systems for motion controls. So Sony released PlayStation Move and Microsoft the Kinect. The Kinect did have a lot of excitement behind it, as it consists of a camera that goes into that specialized USB port that I mentioned earlier, which only the S model had at the time, so only this model was capable of using it. And as noted on the event centered around the Kinect, they wanted to get rid of the controller so that you would only use motion, your body, to play Kinect-specific games. The Kinect can sense hand movements, feet movements, depth, and where you move every respective body part. It even has microphones built in so that you can use your voice to communicate with in-game elements. People were very impressed with the idea behind the Kinect, as it should be so much easier and immersive to use than a Wii is with its Wii remote. It was an instant success based on hype alone. It sold a ton of units, and it completely overshadowed Sony's plans for PlayStation Move, which was just another Wii remote for the PlayStation 3. However, in execution, it left a lot to be desired. Some of those tech demos that they showed off, including a game that actually lets you speak and interact with artificial intelligence on your screen, were never actually available to customers, so this never actually happened. Instead, we got some games that could work well and would be fun to play, but the Kinect has a requirement that quickly kills it for many people. You need a decent amount of space between you and the Kinect itself for it to register a lot of your inputs correctly. So for a game like Dragon Ball Kinect that requires you to keep your entire body in frame, you probably won't be playing this in a bedroom, or even most New York City living rooms. There just isn't enough space. Even then, movements could be really finicky, and it would create inputs that you definitely never meant to have in the game. This was actually because Microsoft ended up not being able to include the processor that was theoretically going to make all of this possible. So no more Natal. They had to scale down a lot of the tech, which meant developers couldn't really do some of the things that they were meant to. The Kinect was filled with experiences that were only fun occasionally, and never even reached its max potential, alienating gamers who wanted games like that Star Wars demo that they had, and even developers who wanted to put more complex games onto their platform. It just became a gimmick for casuals, which is fine, but it's not what they marketed it to be until later on. Regardless of everything that I just told you, it sold exceptionally well as they made it to 8 million units in 2 months, selling each one of these for $149. They bundled it together with the 360S if you wanted to get both for $299 or $399 depending on how much storage you needed. This was actually one of the most successful times for the Xbox 360 as Kinect was featured so much on TV. And this was literally the best version of the system with so many incredible games so pouring in at a consistent rate. The Xbox 360S was such an incredible system, and you could see how ambitious Microsoft was regarding what features and tech they could squeeze into their platform, with Kinect being a very noble attempt at taking the spotlight from the Wii and pushing Sony aside with the move. But Microsoft was already very hard at work with their next generation system, and as the final 360 unit that we ever got, they gave us the Xbox 360e, a stylish contender. The E model of the 360 is a pretty interesting one, as it was released in 2013, but it's not a model that really brought that much attention to the Xbox brand. This system is actually just a little bit smaller than the S model, while having a lot of the same benefits that the previous one offers. It has a very modern look that almost separates itself entirely from the aesthetic of the original and S models, and it really does stand on its own as a system that is not meant to attract any attention whatsoever in your living room. On the front, you will find physical buttons next to the DVD drive for power and ejecting discs. Then you will find a sync button, 2 USB-A ports behind this flap, and you can still add or upgrade the hard drive through the slot on the right side or the bottom depending on how you have it. Then on the back you will find a new power connector, which resembles a barrel plug from a laptop charger, an HDMI port with a different style for the AV port, as it now features a different kind of cable to get composite only, a specialized port for the Kinect, an Ethernet port, and 2 USB-A ports. This unit does come with Wi-Fi built in as well, since now it's so much more common, an essential part of our daily lives at this point. The E model came bundled with a black controller as expected, and it does have a lot of the same features as the Slim model. In terms of the heat output, power consumption, noise level, reliability, etc., it is basically identical to the S model, since Microsoft had already perfected the design of the 360 at this point. But it was essentially priced the same as an S model, costing about $299 if you wanted a 250GB hard drive, or $199 if you were fine with 4GB. Again, the sizes were fine if you were a physical disc kind of person, so there was an answer for everyone. And it did play everything the same as any other system. So at the end of the day, the only thing that is special about it is that it was meant to complement what Microsoft had in store just a few months down the line. Excitement in gaming was at the highest it has ever been, as by 2013, gaming was very mainstream and basically everybody had something to play on every system. This was the fiercest competition in any console war, as Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo had no intention of holding back. The Xbox 360 was insanely popular, and so many things fell into place for Microsoft. They even overcame a loss of millions upon millions of dollars due to the 360's Red Ring of Death, and bounced back with incredible offerings that helped to shape an entire generation of gamers. At this point, the 7th generation was the fiercest and longest generation of gaming we had ever seen. The 360 was certainly partially responsible for that. The 360 was Microsoft's best-selling console of all time as of the posting of this video. In the closest competition ever witnessed in gaming history, the Xbox still managed to be in 3rd and final place, but it didn't really matter, because the differences in numbers indicate that one only got ahead of the other by a bit. The Wii won this generation as it sold 100 million units. The PlayStation 3 was left behind by Nintendo as they sold 87 million units. Then the Xbox 360 sold 84 million units in its lifetime. The impact of the Xbox 360 was certainly felt, and expectations for the next generation of gaming were extremely high. So later, in 2013, Microsoft announced and later released a console that completely tarnished their brand in ways that have not been mended to this day. This is Microsoft's most controversial system of all time. To be completely honest with you, I don't know when I will be able to make the mini documentary on this console, as I have to get all 3 models to show off in the video, as I usually do. But subscribe, as I've got many documentaries up on the channel with many more to come. Now, thank you so much for watching. Leave your suggestions in the comments for future bite-sized documentaries, and until next time.